She was paid to ruin his blind date. But the single dad CEO millionaire fell in love instead. Cassie Bell wiped her hands on her apron and exhaled as the kitchen door swung shut behind her. The familiar clatter of dishes and muffled jazz from the dining hall faded as she stepped out into the alley behind Le Marais, the upscale bistro where she worked the night shift. She had only wanted a few minutes of air. Instead, she found a man standing there, tall, clean-shaven, dressed in a camel coat and polished shoes that didn't belong anywhere near a service entrance. His eyes were sharp, businesslike. He looked her over once, then stepped forward without preamble. "You work here, don't you?" Cassie froze. "Yes? I need your help. Just 5 minutes of your time." He reached into his coat and pulled out a plain white envelope. "And this is for you." She didn't take it. "What is this?" He spoke calmly, like he was offering her a shift trade. "There's a man here tonight. Julian Cross. Table by the front window. He's meeting someone. I want the date ruined." Cassie stared at him. "I'm sorry. What?" He stepped closer. "You go in, pretend to be his ex. Make a scene. Say he lied to you. That he has a kid. That he promised you something. Whatever you want. Just enough to end the date before it starts." She blinked. "Why me?" "You work here. You'll be let in. No one will question you. And I'll pay you $3,000 for 5 minutes of theater." He held the envelope out again. Cassie hesitated. Her heartbeat pounded behind her ears. 3,000. Enough to cover her mom's hospital admission that had just been sprung on her an hour ago. The nurse's words still echoed in her head. "We can't begin treatment without a deposit." She took the envelope. The man nodded once, then turned and disappeared around the corner without saying another word. 15 minutes later, Julian Cross was seated by the window, dressed in charcoal gray, posture straight, expression unreadable. Across from him sat a woman in a red dress, confident, beautiful, sipping wine as though she owned the room. Cassie stood by the entrance, shaking. She had removed her apron. Her name tag was gone. She looked like a guest. She forced herself forward. She stopped by their table, let out a breath, and said loudly, "Julian, seriously?" He looked up. The woman glanced at her, confused. Cassie played her part. She sniffled, let her voice tremble. "You told me it wasn't over. You said you were still trying, for Eli. And now I find you here, like none of it mattered?" Several guests turned their heads. A server stopped mid-step. "I gave you everything," Cassie went on, louder now, heart hammering. "You said you needed space, not her. What am I supposed to tell your son?" The woman in red stiffened. Julian stayed silent. Cassie waited for the explosion, for the denial, the angry demand to leave. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, his eyes, cool, gray-blue, fixed on her face with unnerving calm. Then, in a voice so low only she could hear, he said, "If you wanted my attention, you didn't have to do this." Cassie's throat closed. She hadn't expected that. There was no accusation in his voice, no cruelty, only quiet disappointment. She felt her cheeks flush with shame. She started, but no words came. Julian turned away, picked up his glass, and looked back at the woman in red. Cassie backed away, pulse pounding. Her hands shook as she turned and walked out the door. The envelope weighed heavy in her coat pocket. The air outside was colder now, but it wasn't the cold that made her chest ache. She took the money to ruin a stranger's date, but somewhere between the lie and his silence, she realized the only thing ruined was herself. By morning, the video was everywhere. A grainy, slightly tilted clip, clearly shot by someone pretending to text from a neighboring table, showed a distressed woman confronting a well-dressed man during what appeared to be a formal dinner. Her voice cracked, accusations flew, and guests turned to watch with morbid curiosity. The caption read, "Millionaire CEO Julian Cross publicly confronted by unhinged ex during blind date." The internet, of course, ate it up. By lunchtime, the clip had spread across social media platforms, shared by gossip accounts, corporate watchdogs, and even parenting blogs. Theories spiraled. Was the woman really his ex? Was the date set up? Was it all a PR stunt? The media didn't wait for answers. Headlines flooded the web. CEO's secret scandal. What Julian Cross is hiding. The face of a broken home? Would you trust your future to this man's company? Inside the glass and steel headquarters of Crosspoint Technologies, Julian sat in silence as his executive team danced around their panic. "The video's already at 4.6 million views," said one PR lead. "We're seeing negative sentiment rise by the hour." "Investors are calling," another added. "The board wants a response by this afternoon." Julian didn't flinch, but inside, he was seething. Not at the media, not even at the woman from last night. Not yet. What cut deepest was Eli. That morning, his 6-year-old son had asked, "Why are people talking about you on Mommy's computer?" Julian had no answer. Elsewhere in the city, Cassie Bell sat on the edge of her bed, her phone glowing with the same viral headlines. She didn't have to click. She recognized the video thumbnail. Her face mid-sob, Julian frozen in shock. She felt sick. It had been a job, one stupid, desperate decision. Now it was a wildfire. She had tried to message him, tried emailing the company. She even dropped off a handwritten note at the front desk of Crosspoint, unsigned, because she couldn't bring herself to attach her name. Nothing came back, not even an auto-reply. She couldn't blame him. A week later, Julian was scheduled to attend the signing of a major government contract, one he had fought for over 2 years to secure. It was supposed to be a quiet formality. Instead, when he arrived, a crowd of reporters swarmed the entrance. Microphones flashed. Questions barked from every angle. "Mr. Cross, care to comment on the viral video? Is your personal life affecting business judgment? Was the date staged, or is this a pattern of behavior?" Somewhere in the crowd, someone muttered, "That's the scandal guy." It wasn't loud, but it cut like a blade. Julian stopped, looked up at the tall glass building in front of him, then turned around, walked back to his car, and left. He didn't say a word. Cassie saw the footage that night. A different video, same Julian. This time, he wasn't being ambushed by a fake ex. He was just a man, quietly walking away. She lowered the phone, her stomach twisted in knots. She had accepted money to humiliate a stranger, but the damage she caused was no longer just a story online. It had a face, a name, a little boy who had asked about his dad, and maybe that was the worst part. Julian had walked out of the contract room in silence, but Cassie was the one carrying the weight of the words that never should have been spoken. Cassie stood outside the tall glass tower that housed Crosspoint Technologies, clutching a paper bag with 2 coffees inside and a cream-colored envelope with her name signed carefully at the bottom. She had spent an entire night rewriting the letter by hand, trying to get the tone right, the words honest, not pitiful. The receptionist at the front desk offered a polite but firm smile. "Mr. Cross isn't available to receive walk-ins." "I'm not here for a meeting," Cassie said softly. I wanted to leave him this." Before the receptionist could respond, a uniformed security guard appeared beside her. "Ma'am, if you're not an employee or scheduled guest, I'll have to ask you to leave the premises." Cassie nodded, the sting immediate and sharp, though no one had raised their voice. She left the letter on the counter, still warm coffee in hand, and exited without another word. The next day, she walked back into Rosefinch Cafe, the small coffee shop tucked between a bookstore and a dry cleaner downtown. It was the same place where she had once spotted Julian reading alone by the window, always ordering black coffee, always paying with exact change. She asked the owner if she could help clean for a few hours in exchange for tips. "You don't work here anymore," he said, confused. "I'm not asking to be paid," Cassie replied. "Just let me help." She cleaned every table, polished the brass handles, rearranged the sugar caddies just the way Julian used to like them. At 4:42 p.m., the bell above the door chimed. Julian walked in. Her breath caught as she stepped back behind the counter, not daring to speak, not even sure he would look her way. He didn't. He ordered his coffee from someone else. He passed her like she was air, not cruel, just invisible. Cassie watched him leave, her heart sinking. That night, the skies opened up. Rain poured onto the city in silver sheets. Cassie walked home without an umbrella, the cold soaking through her jacket, her socks, her bones. She stopped at a crosswalk and wiped at her cheeks. She wasn't even sure which drops were rain and which were hers anymore. Inside her apartment, she sat at her tiny kitchen table and opened her laptop. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard for a long time. Then, slowly, she typed, "Subject, no excuses. Message, I know I don't deserve a second chance. I know I made a choice that hurt you and embarrassed you and gave you every reason to hate me. But I owe you a real apology, not through someone else, not anonymously. This is me, Cassie Bell, and I am sorry." She hit send. There was no reply. Not that night. Not the next day. Only silence. But in that silence, she felt something shift, not between her and Julian, but within herself. She had been trying to fix the damage. Now, she was finally facing it. The late autumn air was crisp, the kind that carried the scent of fallen leaves and distant wood smoke. Cassie wrapped her scarf a little tighter as she cut through Maplewood Park on her way home from the library. It was one of those rare quiet afternoons, just her thoughts and the rustling of trees above. She was rounding a familiar path near the playground when she saw them. Julian. And a boy, dark-haired, grinning, chasing after a paper airplane. Cassie froze. She had only ever seen Julian in boardrooms, in headlines, in the back of coffee shops pretending not to notice her. But this was different. His coat was tossed on a bench, his sleeves were rolled. He was laughing. The boy turned sharply and ran toward her. Cassie's breath caught. "Auntie Cassie." The voice was bright, excited. The boy crashed into her legs and wrapped his arms around her in a quick hug before pulling back. It took her a second to place him. Eli, Julian's son. She had taught an after-school art program at the local elementary school a few months back. Eli had been in her Tuesday group. They had drawn monsters and built paper cities. She'd even patched his drawing folder when it tore. Julian approached slowly, clearly surprised. "I didn't realize," he began, but his voice trailed off. Cassie straightened, already flustered. "I was just passing through. I didn't mean to interrupt." Julian's gaze flicked between her and his son. "Eli," he said gently, "why don't you go fly your plane near the bench, just for a minute?" Eli nodded, already darting away with the same energy Cassie remembered from her class. Julian looked back at her. She met his eyes and spoke before she lost her nerve. "Do you think I could just talk to you? 1 minute. No emails, no scenes, just real words." He hesitated, then gave a slight nod. They walked slowly along the gravel path, the quiet between them heavier than any apology she'd ever written. "I didn't expect to see you here," he finally said. "I didn't expect to still feel this guilty months later," she replied with a soft laugh, but it didn't hide the weight in her voice. "I wasn't trying to hurt you, Julian. I know how that sounds, but it's the truth." He didn't interrupt. "My mom was admitted to the hospital the same night. I had no savings, no backup plan. I was scared, and then this guy just shows up, offers cash, tells me I just need to act. 5 minutes of humiliation, and I could get her a bed, a chance." She stopped walking and turned to face him. "I'm not saying it was right. I'm saying I was desperate, and I thought I could live with it." Her voice cracked. "But I can't." Julian stared ahead, jaw tight, his hands tucked into his coat pockets. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. "I wasn't angry." Cassie blinked, surprised. "I was disappointed," he said, eyes finally meeting hers. "Because for a moment, I thought you were real." Her breath hitched. "I saw you," he continued. "The way you spoke, the emotion. I thought, maybe someone out there actually saw me for more than what I own." And then, he shook his head. "I ruined it," she whispered. "You broke it," he corrected, "but not all of it." They stood in silence for a moment. The wind rustled the trees. Somewhere nearby, Eli laughed as his paper plane soared. Cassie didn't ask for forgiveness. Julian didn't offer it. But for the first time, there was no judgment between them, no performance, just two people, each carrying their own regrets, finally willing to see the other fully. And maybe that was where everything started to shift. After that afternoon in the park, something shifted. Julian didn't call Cassie, didn't send an email, didn't drop by the cafe. But the next time their paths crossed, at Eli's school pickup or in the neighborhood market, he didn't look away. He nodded. Sometimes he held her gaze a second longer than necessary. It wasn't warmth, but it wasn't ice anymore. Cassie held on to that, not as hope, but as permission. She could stop trying to erase the past. What mattered now was doing something with it. The guilt still clung to her, not because he hadn't forgiven her, he hadn't, not out loud, but because her part in it still lingered like smoke after a fire. She didn't want to be the reason a good man's name had been dragged through mud. She didn't want the story to end at sorry. So she went back to the place where it had all started. Rose Finch Cafe. The same back entrance. The same bell over the door. The same faint scent of roasted beans and lemon scones. The manager, Michael, looked up from the counter. "Cassie?" he said, surprised. "I was wondering," she began, nerves rattling in her chest. "Do you still have security footage from a few months back?" He raised an eyebrow. "From what day?" "October 12th, around 6:30 am. There was a man. He approached me out back, camel coat, gave me an envelope." Michael nodded slowly. "I remember the story. You were the woman in the video, right? With Julian Cross." Cassie swallowed. "Yes." He didn't press her. Instead, he gestured for her to follow him into the back office. It smelled of paper and burnt espresso. He typed a few things into the old computer, clicked through folders. Minutes passed, and then, there it was. The black and white footage showed a man approaching her behind the cafe. No sound. But the image was clear. He handed her an envelope, spoke briefly, then walked off quickly, glancing over his shoulder. Cassie stared at the screen, her hands clenched in her lap. Michael leaned back. "You want a copy?" "Yes, please." That night, Julian answered the knock at his door with a frown. Cassie stood there, holding a flash drive. "I'm not here to talk," she said quietly. "Just watch this, then decide what you want to do." He didn't invite her in, but he didn't shut the door either. She placed the drive in his palm and left. An hour later, Julian sat in his study, the video looping on his laptop. He watched it again and again. The man's stance, the envelope, the way Cassie had hesitated before taking it. Julian leaned back in his chair, closed his eyes, and whispered to himself, "I knew you weren't that kind of person, but I needed to see it for myself." The next morning, his legal counsel arrived in his office. "Find him," Julian said. "The man in the video. I want a name." Quietly. It took 2 weeks, but they did. The man had ties to a rival firm, one that had been competing for the same government software contract Julian had nearly secured before the scandal broke. It had all been engineered. The humiliation, the headlines, the viral video. A perfect play, using a desperate girl to turn a private dinner into public disgrace. Julian's jaw tightened. His first instinct was to go public, call the man out, ruin him in return. But he paused, then picked up his phone. "Cassie," he said when she answered. "Can you come in?" She arrived the same day, wary but no longer afraid. Julian stood by the window in his office when she entered. The city stretched out behind him, but his eyes were on her. "I don't want revenge," he said simply. Cassie tilted her head. "I want the truth out. I want to reclaim the part of the story that was stolen, and I want to do it the right way. Not alone. With you, if you're ready." Her breath caught. This was not a demand. It was a hand held out. She stepped forward. "I'm ready," she said, voice steady. "This time, for the truth. They shook hands, no longer as the man she had wronged and the girl trying to make up for it, but as two people choosing to write a better ending, together. The camera rolled in silence for a few seconds before Julian Cross leaned forward slightly in his chair, hands folded, face steady. "This will be the first and last time I speak about what happened," he began, voice calm but sure, "because while this is a personal story, it became public, and silence doesn't undo damage." Across from him, Cassie sat with her hands resting gently in her lap. No makeup, no curated lighting, just her, in soft gray and quiet strength. The video was released on both the company's internal platform and its public media channels the following morning. It ran just under 7 minutes. Julian spoke first. He didn't name names or point fingers. He didn't replay the viral footage. He simply laid out the facts. "There was an orchestrated effort to damage my reputation using a private dinner as the stage," he said. "But this story isn't about what was done to me. It's about what people do when desperation meets opportunity, and how we decide to move forward when the worst is already behind us." He paused. No one should have to choose between survival and dignity. Then it was Cassie's turn. She didn't look down at notes. She didn't try to cry. "I made a choice I regret," she said plainly. "Not because I got caught, not because it hurt someone powerful, but because I let fear dictate the kind of person I was willing to be." Her voice didn't shake, but it carried weight. "I don't expect people to forget what I did. I only ask to be remembered not by the mistake I made, but by what I choose to do after." 1. The video ended there. No dramatic music, no logo splash, just a long pause on their joined silhouettes, then a fade to black. The response was overwhelming. Internally, Julian's board issued a statement commending his transparency and values-first leadership. Publicly, media outlets pivoted from scandal to redemption. Headlines shifted from disgraced CEO to a masterclass in corporate courage. But the biggest surprise came from everyday people. Letters, emails, comments. Some wrote of times they had made impossible choices for their families. Others spoke of their own second chances and how they'd never forget the people who gave them. Cassie, once invisible in the background of someone else's narrative, had become a quiet emblem of accountability. Not perfection, not pity, but hope. And Julian didn't stop at the video. The following week, he called Cassie into a team meeting at his headquarters. A new initiative was being launched, Second Chances, a program designed to offer job training and support for women who had experienced personal, legal, or financial hardship. "I'd like you to be on the development team," Julian said in front of the room. "Not as a token, as someone who understands what starting over actually feels like." Cassie's breath caught. The offer was real. So was the weight of it. She looked around the table at the half-dozen faces watching her. Then back at Julian. "I accept," she said simply. "Not for you, for the women like me." From that day forward, she came in 3 days a week. She asked questions, built modules, connected with counselors. She wasn't just part of the team, she helped shape the program into something that felt human. And every now and then, Eli would come into the office after school, backpack swinging, cheeks flushed. "Hi, Miss Cassie," he'd chirp, running over to hug her legs. "Hi, buddy," she'd say, crouching down to his level. "Got any new stories for me today?" He always did. He'd sit beside her with a marker and a pad, drawing heroes and dragons, asking for feedback, while Julian met with board members or reviewed budgets nearby. Those afternoons were simple, ordinary, and yet they felt like something rare, like a beginning that didn't need to erase the past, only build better from it. It was a Thursday evening when Cassie knocked gently on Julian's door, holding a worn paperback in her hand. Eli had left it at the office earlier that week, a book about talking owls and magical forests he'd insisted she read too. She could have returned it the next day, but some part of her had wanted to come now. Julian opened the door with a soft, "Hey," stepping aside to let her in. The house was warm, lit with soft amber light. The scent of roasted chicken lingered faintly in the air. Eli's just finishing his dinner, Julian said. You're staying. No arguments. They ate together at the kitchen table, nothing fancy, just leftovers and laughter. Eli talked about a science project involving baking soda volcanoes. He asked Cassie to come to school for Family Career Day because, in his words, she teaches writing stuff and also how not to cry when you're nervous. Julian chuckled at that, and Cassie felt something loosen inside her. After dinner, Eli ran off to draw, leaving Cassie and Julian alone in the kitchen. They washed dishes side by side, sleeves rolled, hands slick with soap and memory. Cassie dried a plate and glanced at him. Do you ever think about how close we both came to giving up? Julian nodded slowly, rinsing a glass. More often than I want to admit. My mom used to say, Cassie continued, sometimes life shoves you so far off track, you forget what you were even trying to reach. And sometimes, Julian replied, placing the glass on the rack, it shoves you straight into something better. Their eyes met. It wasn't electric. It wasn't cinematic. But it was warm. Real. Eli's voice floated in from the living room, telling a ridiculous knock-knock joke. Julian laughed, a deep, honest sound Cassie hadn't heard before. She turned to look at him and realized the sharp edges he used to carry had softened. Not disappeared, but softened. She wasn't the only one who had changed. After Eli had gone to bed, Julian led her outside. The backyard was quiet, framed by a string of soft garden lights. At the center was a small patch of soil, half dug, waiting. This used to be hers, he said, gesturing. My wife, we planted herbs, tomatoes. She said there was something sacred about watching things grow. Cassie stayed silent. I haven't touched it since she passed, Julian added, but I want to again, with Eli, and maybe, he paused, with someone who understands what it's like to start over. Then he reached into his back pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Cassie took it gently, unfolded it, and blinked. It was a sketched layout, simple, thoughtful. A small classroom space, bookshelves, reading corners. A sign that read, The Story Seedlings Project, free creative writing for kids. You told me, Julian said quietly, that you gave up your dream to take care of your mom. I think it's time someone gave it back to you. Cassie looked up, eyes stinging. She stepped forward, not out of obligation, not out of guilt, but out of something that had grown slowly between them, something like trust. And she hugged him. No words, no kiss. Just two people, standing in a backyard under the stars, holding on to the quiet truth that they were no longer afraid to be seen. They weren't running anymore. 1 year later, nothing about Cassie Bell's life looked like a fairy tale, and maybe that was the point. She was not famous, not trending, not headlining any articles or viral interviews. She worked part-time at the neighborhood library, helping elderly visitors find books and middle schoolers find their voice. On Saturdays, she taught a small creative writing group for teens in the back room, just folding chairs, mismatched mugs of cocoa, and kids learning how to say hard things through stories. There was peace in the routine, quiet, steady peace. And for the first time in years, Cassie walked with her shoulders straight and her eyes open. She no longer flinched at the mirror. She had forgiven herself. Eli had grown, just a little taller, just a little louder. He was now part of the expressive reading team at school. His favorite poem was one about a knight who couldn't win battles but saved people anyway. Cassie had helped him prepare, teaching him how to read not just with voice, but with heart. He won second place, then made her a cardboard medal with glitter glue. She kept it pinned beside her desk. Julian, still the CEO of one of the most influential tech firms on the West Coast, was just as busy as ever. The suits, the boardrooms, the headlines, all still part of his world. But now, his life had a softer edge. Evenings looked different. Some nights, Julian, Cassie, and Eli would sit at the small round table in the living room, Julian sipping his usual black tea, Cassie wrapped in a worn sweater, and Eli reading aloud a new short story he'd written, sometimes about astronauts, sometimes about kids who got lost and found their way back, not home, but to people who felt like it. There were no extravagant declarations, no sweeping music in the background, just warmth, laughter, the clinking of mugs, and the steady comfort of being with someone who knew the whole of you, and stayed. And then came Christmas. Snow fell gently outside their apartment window, dusting the railings and trees with soft white. Inside, string lights blinked on the banister, and a modest tree stood by the window, half covered in paper stars and handmade ornaments. Eli, balancing on the couch arm, handed Cassie another ornament. "Put it right there," he said, pointing. Cassie smiled. "You're the boss." As she leaned forward to place it on the branch, she turned slightly, looking back at Julian. "Do you think," she hesitated, voice almost too soft to hear, "your wife would be okay with this?" There was a pause, but Eli answered first. "She would be happy," he said simply, "that you both stopped being sad." Cassie's breath caught in her throat. Julian stepped forward, silent. In his hand was a small box, no velvet, no shine, just simple wood. He placed it in her palm. Inside was a ring, modest, old, worn around the edges, a family piece, his mother's, once. "I don't want perfect," he said, voice low. "I just want real, and this feels real." She didn't cry. Not this time. She just nodded, eyes full, hands steady. Because once, Cassie had been paid to ruin a stranger's chance at love. But somehow, in the middle of a broken moment, she had rewritten an entire life. His, hers, and a little boy's too, with nothing but truth. And that was more than real. That was home. Thank you for watching this soul-stirring journey of second chances, quiet redemption, and love that grows not in perfection, but in truth. If this story touched your heart, made you reflect, or reminded you that even broken beginnings can lead to beautiful endings, don't forget to subscribe to Soul Stirring Stories. And if you believe more people need stories like this,